next week and just run you through the dynamics, what the experts are saying about credit cards, the use of them. We're going to talk about utilizing debt consolidation, whether that's a wise move or not. We're going to talk about managing your credit score. And then that'll be next week, and some of that will spill out into the following week, I'm sure. And then we're going to talk about things like purchasing a house, purchasing a car, some of the practical things that relate to that. All right, so let's go over this. Letty, you had a question last week. Would it be a good idea to start with that? I remember I cut it off and didn't let you ask your question. Do you remember what it was?
Of a comment. I think we were talking about, I don't remember what we were talking about, but
we were talking about spending. We were talking about saving and not spending what you don't earn and so forth.
Well, okay. What just came to mind is that I was just going to relay a story of most of my brothers and sisters are saved. I just have one that's not saved. And he actually lives and works in one of the most materialistic atmosphere. He works at Neiman Marcus on Rodeo Drive. So he's surrounded by people that the material world is what makes them. And I was just going to comment that one time he made a comment to me, and I was convicted from his comment. You know, a lot of people like to buy things by labels, by name, brands. And his comment is that I don't need to promote somebody else's name on me, you know? And as Christians, you know, the Bible says to put on Christ, not necessarily the world, you know? And sometimes I think it's hard for us to live mindful of that. We get caught up in the material world.
That's very good, and that actually helps me segue. We're going to talk about the spirit of materialism that is ruining a lot of people's lives. You take the spirit of materialism, connect it with a credit card, and you got a major potential problem. And all of this business that Letty mentioned about, having to have name brands and Coach purses and so forth can be a big burden. So let's read the text. It's very familiar to us by now. This is God speaking to the children of Israel, speaking to his church. And you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers as it is to this day. So that scripture obviously gives us a point and a purpose and a projection to money. Its intent is God moving in your life to give you wisdom and ability and skill in how to accumulate wealth for the purpose of advancing his kingdom. And of course, along with that comes personal blessing and solvency and the ability to live debt-free and not have to borrow for the normal functions of life and so forth. So all of that is very relevant to what we are talking about here. And I've made it a point to emphasize that feature. That the church and the ministry and the vision that we have as a fellowship to train disciples, plant churches, that's God's given you power to get wealth. Again, the side issue is that you're personally blessed. When you exercise God-given power to get wealth, prioritize the church, that's the avenue to real blessing. And of course, there's wisdom in where you put money, where you place money, what you do with money, how you invest it, how you spend it. You have to exercise wisdom, and no amount of tithing, for example, is going to cover for stupidity. In other words, you can tithe, but if you're unwise and foolish with the rest of the 90%, then your tithing is not going to necessarily cover that. So we made 2 points last week, and I want to add a third to that. So last week, the cornerstones of what we're talking about here, and this is common sense. It's very basic. 3 points, 2 of them we talked about last week. Number 1, you cannot spend more than you take in. I know that it's a revelation. You can't spend. Whatever that requires, whatever that demands of you, you're not going to succeed financially if you're spending more than you're taking in. Number two, no matter what you earn, you can always save. No matter what you earn, you can always save. Now, some of you are convinced you can't, and the reason you're convinced you can't is because you're spending everything that comes in. If you would take the money that you're wasting, the money that is unnecessarily or foolishly spent, and saved that, you'd have money to save. So no matter what you earn, you can always save. And number three, this is what we're going to cover today. In order to succeed financially, you have to work from a budget. Now, you might say, well, I don't have a budget and I'm doing pretty good. You'd be doing a whole lot better if you had a budget, if you wrote things down, etc., meaning that you have to write it down, knowing what's coming in. Let's cut the lights a little bit, and I want to show you a little video that I happen to remember that I saw a number of years ago. We were able to dig it up. You can't get rid of it for next time when we do this about 10 years from now? Okay. All right, so let me start from that great video to ask you a few questions. How many of you have a checking account with a card? Raise your hand. Checking account, debit card. So the ones that aren't raising your hand don't have a check. You've somehow figured out a way to function in life without a checking account. Okay, well, maybe you can teach next week. How many of you with an uplifted hand have a savings account? Well, I'm very impressed with that. A savings account. I won't ask how many don't have a savings account. And I'm not going to ask how many of you have money in your savings account because I don't want you to advertise for obvious reasons. How many of you are serious about getting your financial house in order? You don't have to raise your hand for this one. How many of you are serious about getting your financial house in order? Now, that doesn't mean that you're not solvent right now. How many of you could be doing so much better financially with discipline, with budgeting, and with wisdom? You may have money rolling in and you can meet your obligations, but you're wasting and you're squandering enough to make you a millionaire. I'm saying that metaphorically, but it's a possibility. Now, do you want to be solvent financially? Now, that's a question for those here who may have scary levels of debt. Do you want to be solvent financially, or do you want to just continue the way you are? Another question, do you want to prosper financially? So I'm asking the question. Some of them may sound like they're rhetorical questions, but they're really not, because you might answer, do you want financial solvency? You might say yes, but you're not willing to do what's necessary. Do you want to prosper financially? Yes, but you're not willing to do what's necessary in the financial realm in order to make that happen. And we live in a culture that inspires the kind of behavior that will prevent those things. You're not financially solvent. You may theoretically want to prosper, but your habits are not conducive to financial prosperity. And the final question is, do you want to get out of the debt that is destroying your life and perhaps your marriage if you're married? It's stifling you. It's hindering and undermining you. Conference comes. You have impulses. You wish you could drop $100 or $500 or $1,000 in the offering plate, but all of that money is going to the credit card interest. And I think God has an interest in this matter. How much money is represented by this congregation that is squandered and wasted, that if you had it, it could be given to advance the kingdom. Maybe one more missionary could have been planted if we would accumulate all of that wasted money together. It could accumulate to $30 or $40 or $50,000. I don't think that's too high of a figure. Probably a lot more than that. Do you want to get out from under the debt? Now, some of you can strategically get out of your debt. In other words, you can enact habits and practices that will slowly get you out of your debt. And there may be some here, you need a miracle. Because there's no way strategically that you can get out of the level of debt that you're underneath, earning the money that you earn, unless you do something about that and so forth. And I've seen plenty of people who got serious about their mismanagement, their disobedience to God, their wasteful spending, and their obedience to God. They got serious about it. Even though their debt is insurmountable, they can never strategically get it dealt with, but they get very serious, and then God will intervene and work a miracle on their behalf somehow. So I can say then that no matter how far you may be in debt, you get out of it. But you're going to have to be very serious about what you do. And so what I want to talk about today is budgeting. I don't know what percentage here. I'm not going to ask. I don't know what percentage of you write down what comes in and what goes out. Now, a lot of that, a bank statement does that. But the benefit of budgeting is that it will categorize for you your spending habits. So what is budgeting? What does that mean? Budgeting. Not budgeting means income, spending, no concept of what's going on other than perhaps the main things that you're dealing with. Do we have that? I forgot about it, that budget paper. Who has those? Okay, get those distributed very quickly. And we'll go over that in a minute. So when you're handed it, just keep your attention here. We'll look at the budget in a minute. So budgeting is really a very simple process. And I can't emphasize enough how much this will help you when you physically see what you're doing with your money. For some of you, it will shock you. It will be a revelation why you're in so much trouble and difficulty. Most people don't budget. That's what statistics tell us, especially young people today. I remember growing up, my dad, once a month, sitting at the kitchen table with all the paperwork in front of him. Of course, like I said, budgeting can be a little more streamlined today because of access to bank statements, internet, and so forth. It can be a lot more streamlined. Remember, don't look at that right now because you'll miss what I'm saying. Just set it aside, and we'll get to it in a very short amount of time here, a few minutes. So most people don't really know what they're spending. Now, you might say, well, Pastor, of course people know what they're spending. They pull out their, they may be pulling out a debit card. I'm paying for a meal here. I'm buying this item there. I'm writing a check for this. You're consciously aware when you're buying something, but it collectively on a sheet of paper or a pie chart or sort of a graph, we don't do that, and it would be enormously helpful if you would get into the practice of that. So if you're serious, getting out of debt, about financial solvency, and about prosperity, you have to budget, and you have to allocate amounts of money for certain things and discipline yourself within the boundaries of limitation. It helps to see what you're dealing with and to start tracking your spending. Add it up, face it, look at it, let your budget speak to you. And some of you, your budget would say, what in the heck are you doing spending a amount of money on this? I mean, you could invest that amount of money. Let's just say you're spending $500 a month on eating out. I'm not opposed to eating out. I eat out. I use a credit card to pay for meals and so forth. But let's just say that you took that 500, or let's say you took half of it. You're spending five, you save $250 a month. That's several thousand a year that you could save. You could also take that amount of money, put it in a 401k. If you did that for 30 or 40 years, you'd have a very nice and a very comfortable retirement. So a small amount of money saved and invested can go a long way in the future. Start tracking your spending, add it up, look at it, and if you're struggling financially, you'll be able to see where you can cut back, what you need to do. It's like a general looking over a battlefield, knowing what his enemy has and what he has. He's able to see how this is going to play out or how he hopes it will play out, and that's what you need with your money and your finances in the financial realm. So let's look at I need one of those papers, by the way. If you'll run up here with that. Thank you very much. So this is just an example. And it's very simple. It's very basic. The first items on this, it's an example of a budget. Doesn't require budgeting, requires very little skill of any kind. You may say, well, I never went to school or I failed at math. It doesn't matter. You can do this. You don't have to know anything about math. All you have to have is a smartphone with a calculator. Let it do all the work for you. So you first of all have to know exactly what is coming in. And it's amazing that a lot of people who earn a salary don't know exactly what it is. They get 4 paychecks a month rather, or 2 a month, and they don't have a fixed figure in their brain about how much is coming in. If you're a salesman or an investor or a businessman of some kind, not on a salary, then your money and your income can fluctuate, and all the more important to know what your income is during a 30-day period. That is what is at the top of the budget called income. Income is what comes in. So this chart here, the example that's filled out here, and I found this as is, or one of my pastor friends emailed this to me, but he found it as is on the internet and just printed it out. So this is a 2-income home, husband, wife, I'm assuming. One earns $37.50, another $27.50, for a total income of $6,500. Now, there are 3 types of expenses that we all have: fixed, floating, and coaster. And I'll explain what they are. Fixed, same amount every month. That would be your tithe. That would be housing, mortgage or rent, automobile loans. They don't fluctuate. They remain the same. Car insurance, homeowners insurance, life insurance if you have that, child care if you have that. And you can probably think of some other things that would be there that is the same amount every month. That's fixed income. So you write it down. Subtract the fixed income from, fixed expenses rather, from your income, and then you have a balance that you deal with your floating costs. Floating costs are things that fluctuate, like your utilities fluctuate. Your telephone might fluctuate. It has here cable and satellite television expense. If you have that, get out. No. There because it was already there. I didn't intend to have that there. Internet expense, food, dining out, and groceries, that fluctuates. Of course, gasoline and all the other things that are there, medical health care and personal care. And again, there's other floating type of costs. It's money that goes out every month. You've got to try to assess what that might be for any given expense. And you can see there with the fixed income, what is budgeted and what is actual is the same because it's a fixed amount. With the floating, what is budgeted and what actually is spent differs. For example, on the electric and gas expense, this person budgeted 400 but actually spent 375. So you have 22 left over there. All right, and then coaster costs. This would be what people call discretionary spending, things you do that you don't have to do. You choose to do them. I've got the money here, and that would be entertainment, gifts, clothing, and other miscellaneous things. So that's something for you to look at. You can go online, and there's all sorts of similar to this, but just different ways of tracking. Go ahead and put up that pie chart, if you could. This is another way of doing it. One good way, and I do this for the church, is I budget and I manage our church income and expenses on a pie chart, on a Quicken rather, that produces all sorts of features that can help you to see what your income and your spending looks like. So this is just a general pie chart that shows you the percentages that you're spending on certain things. So on this particular pie chart, this individual is spending 35% on housing, 15% on transportation. That would include a car payment. It would include gasoline and so forth. Life, 25%. That's all the things that we talked about. General expenditure. Savings, 10%. Debt repayment, 15%. So again, these are just different tools that you can utilize that will bring you some very necessary revelation about what's going on in your personal finances. People who budget their money can be trusted with money. People who don't budget their money can't be trusted. I thought of the scripture when they found the word of the Lord in the temple, and King Josiah reads it and then initiates craftsmen and various personnel to do the work in the temple. Listen to what it says. This is 2 Kings 22, verse 4. Go up to Hilkiah, the high priest, that he may count the money. So people have been donating money in a chest with a hole in it, and it's been collected there, but nothing's been done with it. The temple's in disrepair. That he may count the money which has been brought into the house of the Lord, which the doorkeepers have gathered from the people. Let them deliver it to the house of the Lord. Let them give it to those who are in the house of the Lord doing the work, to repair the damages of the house, to carpenters and builders and masons, to buy timber and hewn stone, repair the house. However, there need be no accounting made with them of the money delivered into their hand, because they deal faithfully. So somehow they ascertained these people knew what to do with money. They didn't squander. They didn't waste. They didn't worry. If you gave them money, you didn't have to sit around and worry. I don't know how that was ascertained. There had to have been a track record of faithfulness and diligence and wisdom that was discernible and identifiable, but it implies that these were men who had proven ability. They knew how to handle money. They knew how to budget money. The Bible says they're going to have to buy timber, hewn stone to repair the house. They're going to have to labor. They got labor costs, and there's other things that come up. These men can be given money, and then you can not worry about it, because they have a dimension of character where they can budget, spend wisely, not waste, not squander, not misappropriate, appropriate rather, and it implies that there was a character in them present that drew them toward discipline and diligence. And that's really the issue that I want to touch on here, and that is the absence of character when it comes to handling money. I think that's the problem with a lot of us. Misusing a credit card, getting underneath high levels of credit card debt, it's a character issue. Remember I told you my dad never spent a dime of interest on a credit card his whole life. It's character. It's discipline. I don't know anybody that has that level of discipline anymore. So could the same be said that was said about these carpenters and builders and masons? Could the same be said about us? No need to worry about this guy. He gets money, and we know that wisdom is going to be exercised, and no questions are going to need to be asked. We don't even need to hold this person accountable because they have a level of character that is in place, and that level of character is going to be the measure of accountability in their life. I don't know too many people that you can do that with. Everybody needs to be answerable with how they handle money. And it tells us that handling money, and specifically budgeting and the other things that we're talking about, not spending more than what you take in, and saving and budgeting, all of those things, what they imply is they imply that this is an issue of character and integrity. Nobody may be watching, but God's watching. Your wife or your husband may not know what's going on, but you know what's going on. And a person of character has disciplines that prevent him from doing things that are unwise. He's not going to use his credit card unwisely. He's not going to buy something he can't afford. So budgeting and all of these things, savings, budgeting, and not spending more than comes in, it's not just a functional procedure, but you have to have a character, you see. There's a level of character that has to be present. Some people are wasteful and unwise and a little dishonest or a lot dishonest. They squander. And remember, power to get wealth, that's something sacred. Whatever skill, whatever ability, whatever talent God's given you to accumulate wealth, there's a sacred dimension to that, and God's given you that for the purpose of advancing His kingdom. And so if you take that wealth and waste it and are not able to apply the level to which you should be applying to the advance of the kingdom, God's concerned about that. And I think we're going to be held accountable. I feel that very strongly in the management of the finances of this congregation. The offerings, the giving, there's a sacred dimension, whether it's a single mother who gives maybe what would be considered a small amount, or someone who gives all of that is accumulated, put together. And I feel a sacred obligation to manage, to not be wasteful, to use wisdom. This is why we have a church council, so that they know what comes in and what goes out. And they ask questions. Was this necessary? What's going on over here? How we handle wealth is going to be something that we have to answer to God for, because your wealth, as I said, is connected to the advance of God's kingdom on earth. So let's get another verse, the other one I have for today, which is Luke 16. And again, I'm emphasizing the dynamics of character here. He who is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. Character. If you've got the character to manage a small amount with discipline and diligence and wisdom, somebody can bring increase, and your character is there already in place to handle it. The problem with a lot of people is they don't have that discipline when they have a little, and somehow they stumble into a lot, and they get themselves into all kinds of trouble because you haven't developed the character along the way to manage money. You haven't been disciplined when you had a little. You're not disciplined when you have more. And you're going to get into more trouble with a deficient character when you have a lot than when you had a little. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own? See, this is why you think, if you're in debt, the answer is more money, don't you? But the thing is, if you're given more money, at the same time you still have the character that got you into trouble in the first place, you're going to get into more trouble. And we hear people somehow get a financial break, they get money, satisfy all their debts. 2 years later, they're back under a mountain of debt because they don't have character. Now, the idea of the pie chart and budgeting like this on a sheet of paper, the idea is that when you see it, It should have an impact. If you're not budgeting, you're not seeing, and you're missing out on a necessary impact that you need in your life before you stand before God. Look how much I'm spending on question mark. Wow, I had no idea. That could happen to you. I got to cut back in that. That's my problem. I wonder, think about it this way, tithe is 10%. We give offerings besides. If pie chart, think about this. And on your pie chart was your tithing and your giving as a percentage. Let's say it's 15 or 20%. Let's say 15. You tithe 10, you give 5 over and above that. And that's on your pie chart. What if eating out was more than that? Would that make you feel bad? That you spend frivolously money or some other item, some hobby that you have. So, you spend on something that it's not evil, not wrong, but I wonder if that would have an impact. Whoa, I'm giving God less than I'm spending in this frivolous area or this unnecessary, or this area where I'm using all this to spoil. I wonder about debt. I wonder if you could see on a pie chart how much interest you're owing and you're paying on credit cards. If you're making let's say you're making a minimum payment on a credit card, $80 of that could be on interest and only $20 on principal. That's what they do to you, and you never get out from underneath it. So it's going to be a real revelation for you to see what this is going to look like. I mentioned, and I'll mention it again this week, some of you here may need professional assistance in this area. You may need financial counseling. That financial counseling can begin with someone of wisdom in our church that you don't mind confiding in. You can probably only go so far. You may need help beyond that to get some real wisdom on how you need to proceed. So, and I mentioned last week, and I want to say it again, that I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a pastor. I'm teaching from the Bible about money and finances. As you receive this lesson and these lessons and gain revelation, it may mean that you have to make some serious decisions and get some advice, get some counseling, figure out what to do. I can help you to a limited degree in a counseling type session, and perhaps other men here, lay personnel in our church, businessmen, others that are successful in managing and handling money can help you. And you may need to seek that out. So again, I'm going to finish here, and we're going to open it up for some questions and comments and spend a few minutes with that. But again, the idea is when you see it, it should have impact. And I'd say if you're not budgeting and you see it, you're going to be forced to make some decisions. You're going to feel some conviction about what you're doing with your money. How much is God getting? How much is really being invested in God's kingdom in the advance of it, and how much is being wasted and squandered on interest payments to a credit card company? And then I think it's necessary for everyone to have some sort of financial accountability. Married couples argue more about money than any other item. You've got to get on the same page, husband and wife, with your finances. Get your wife involved. Get another pair of eyes. If you're a single brother, or even if you're married, you can get another married guy to help you budget your money and look at your budget with you and help you ascertain what you need to do in the direction you need to go in. So I want these 3 principles to be firmly etched in your mind. You cannot spend more than you take in. The whole culture today is set up for you to do that so that you get underneath the stranglehold of debt payments. You cannot spend more than you take in. Number 2, no matter what you earn, you can always save. If you do not have a savings account, open one this week and and put money in it every week, every time you get paid. Number 3, in order to succeed financially, you have to work from a budget. All right, let's finish there and open it up for questions. Letty, we'll start with you again.
Pastor, I just wanted to comment on the budget. If you do a budget and you get paid either weekly or bi-weekly and you're faithful to it, you'll notice that twice a year, if you get paid bi-monthly, you're going to have an extra paycheck. If you separate your budget into, like, you allocate it in whatever categories by your paycheck, you'll actually have an extra one on your fixed cost, except for the tithe, and that's something that you could use for whatever, either savings or an extra mortgage payment or a vacation. So there are benefits. Even if you don't have extra money at that time, if you stick to it, you'll have an extra 2 paychecks.
That's right. Amen. Sandra.
I just wanted to say, I was raised in a house where it's like when you had money, you spent it. And so when I got married, Ernie was very, very good with money. I thank God that in the before everything happened to us, in 20 years, 25 years, he would never let us buy anything that we couldn't pay for, like on credit, things like that. If we did buy a car, he wanted to pay it off right away. Our house, he always wanted me to give extra money, and we paid off our house, and we bought it really cheap. And so I remember getting mad at him about those things and being bitter because I'd see other people, you know, he made good money all the time, and they always had better stuff because they would go and get it on credit.
Yeah.
But when everything happened to us, you know, that's when I realized that his wisdom and that, you know, they didn't come and take our car away. They didn't come and kick us out of the house. You know, everything that we had was paid for. And I just thank God, you know, for a man that he stood up to me every time. He was like, no, we're not going to do it. And I just thank God for that.
That's a powerful man that stood up to you. A lot of men can't manage that. Amen. Very, very good. Who else had their hand up? Okay, Genevieve.
You know, Pastor, it's not just like if you save, but how you save. So I recently invested in a high-yield savings account where the interest rate is 1.05%, and I think the national average for a savings account is 0.12%, which is like, I believe, a 0.93% increase. So if someone's interested or anyone's interested in seeing the difference, you know, I suggest cutting your savings in half, investing half into a high-yield savings account, and leaving the remaining half in your current savings account. And just over time, seeing the interest accumulate and see how much more unearned interest or income you can receive from just having a high-yield savings account.
I don't know what to say. Out of the mouth of baby. You want to teach them the credit card thing next week? I bet you could do a good job. Mary, did you have your hand up?
I was going to say, Pastor, 3 weeks ago, yesterday, there was a record-breaking here in the United States. The credit card debt hit $1 trillion.
Yeah.
And they're blaming the millennials that they don't know how to save, but it's everybody. They're buying cars on their credit card. That's how ridiculous it's getting.
Yeah. That is true. And debt is, I think, the biggest industry in the world today. Managing debt, buying debt, taking advantage of people's willingness to get into debt. I recommended a book last week called Borrowed, and you ought to read that. It's a scary, eye-opening book about how we got into the current mess that we're in. Anybody else? Any question or comment? Yes, Susie.
Okay, I'm going to totally embarrass myself. So I am not like Ernie and Letty, but I'm learning. And me and Letty have had a lot of disputes because she's just really good. She's really good at saving. She's just really good. And one time I had did this little app on my phone, and we were tracking calories. And obviously I'm not doing good on that either, but we were tracking calories, and I told Letty for something, we were gonna buy something, and I said, Letty, I don't have any money. And she goes, oh, you have money, Susie. She goes, I saw on your tracker, she goes, that you went to Starbucks and you went out to eat. And she goes, if you're doing all that, you have money. And she convicts me all the time because she says, I don't understand why you feel the need to go to Starbucks all the time, which I really don't anymore. But, it's those little things. If you want to pay off debt, that's just my conviction,
Yeah.
but it's true. $5, $5, it adds up. That's a whole nother payment you could be making to a credit card.
Man, very good. Jessica.
When me and my husband first got married, I thought a budget was a checklist of all your bills and you just had the money to pay it off and you checked it off. And that really wasn't a budget at all. That just means you're trying to make ends meet and scramble around the money to pay your bills. And maybe 4 months into our marriage, my husband got the book by Dave Ramsey. It's called A Total Money Makeover. And it's transformed the way we look at it. He looks at it in a biblical way. He's a Christian man. And, if any of you guys get to read that book, it is amazing just to know how to make a budget, or just to know how bound we are by debt, that this is a country of debt. And since we're babies, we're taught, just to, buy things that we can't afford. And just the whole thing about making a budget is not a checklist that you paid off your electric and your gas. It's knowing where your money is going and budgeting to the very last dollar. And if that means the last 53 cents at the end of your check goes to savings, and that's what you do. And through Total Money Makeover, they have an app in the App Store. It's for both Android and iPhone. It's called Every Dollar. And me and my husband download it, but we have the same account. So if I know that he used money for eating out, then I know our budget, I know how much money is left over in that category. So if you guys can get that app, it's really awesome, especially for a married couple. You can keep track of what each other is doing.
Total Money Makeover. Yeah, those things are good. Like I said, this is almost obsolete today, writing it out on a sheet of paper, but I recommend it. But like Jessica said, there's all sorts of other means of budgeting, and an app is a good one. Your husband and wife are both on the same page. They see what each other is spending. What did you spend money on today, honey? Oh, nothing. I just came straight home. No, you didn't. See it here. So that's all very good. Okay, two more, Julie, and then Valerie.
My husband and I, what we did was we have 2 checking accounts. One checking account is all bills. We put money into that account. We pay our bills from that account, and every time we divide our money, it goes, bills go into one account. The other account is gasoline and food to go out, and groceries.
Yeah.
When that money is gone, we're done spending.
Yeah.
So we separate them that way, and we can't overlap because the money for our bills is in a separate account.
Yeah, very good. Those are all good things that help. There's all sorts of little different quirks and systems that couples develop or people develop over time. Valerie.
Not too long ago, my father-in-law was telling me, kind of how he grew up and how he got to the United States. And he was telling me that when his dad became a citizen and they had him do, the oath of taking citizenship, and he was telling me that his father really took it to heart when they told him not to be a burden to the United States.
Yeah.
So he says they were a family of like 11, and he says we worked, and they worked out in the fields, and it didn't matter that they could. I think at that time there was still not like assistance and stuff, but he says even when assistance, like food stamps and all of that came to pass, he would not let anyone do it. And with that being said, if I think back and I'm looking back at my husband's family, most of them, I could say that I don't even know one that is on food stamps or has ever received food stamps or any type of assistance. And I feel like that's, you know, a curse sometimes. You know, of course, if you need it and stuff like that,
Yeah.
I'm not going that route. But I look at my husband's family and I look at my family and all of my family. I mean, they're broke because they want to be.
Yeah.
And I look at Juan's family and it's like, wow, you know, there's a huge difference. But I feel like that made a profound impact.
That's a great lesson for you to see the difference. And the issue, as I said, there is character. There's a dimension of character involved in that generation, and hopefully those attributes, you know, it's not something that you necessarily learn in school, but it can be imparted from father and parents to children and so forth. So that's what we're aiming at. All right, so next week is going to be very, very eye-opening and important and critical. We're going to deal with the curse of the credit card, and we'll move forward from there. Lord bless you. Great session this morning. Appreciate all of you for being here. Thank you. What's the matter with you?